All right, thank you very much, and welcome all to this webinar on how Agile can lead to faster, more predictable, and higher value outcomes. And we're going to share with you how to do that today with the MAHD framework. So let's introduce ourselves a little bit. I'm Dorian Simpson. I'm the founder of the MAHD framework, one of the lead consultants. And I have had experience in business and product management and business leadership. And throughout my experience, as Agile became more popular, understood, just discovered that it's a better way. And it's been my focus in really helping companies how to do that for hardware. And a lot of companies really struggle with that. And that's what led me to be with you here today. So I'm also here with my partner, Vishal Sheth. He's one of our managing partners and lead consultants. And he's an expert in scaling MAD. And he has an emphasis on organization culture and helping companies really get the best out of the whole organization through the concept of organizational flow state. So he's going to be sharing with you as we get going as well. So here's what we have planned for you. Let's start with what is the problem and what are we trying to solve? And we'll share a little bit about the MAD vision, the benefits, and then Vishal's going to take us through some key elements of the MAD framework. And then what we really want to share are a couple of case studies to help you visualize how this can work inside organizations. And we want to make sure we also have time for some Q&A. So if you have questions, jot them down, share them, put them in chat, and we'll take care of as many as we can with the time that we have allowed. So let's dive in. And I think a good place to start is what's the problem? And most of you probably are very familiar with traditional project development processes. Most companies, actually almost 90%, had or have some form of stage gate process, and I'm sure you're quite familiar with the limitations. And it starts at the very beginning, where we move in discovery and definition, and there's just a lot of assumptions that are built into the very beginning, and that's often document in the form of a PRD, and we send that over to R&D, and then there's a lot of back and forth. And we try to develop a detailed Gantt chart, work breakdown, and it almost becomes a contract between marketing and R&D on what to build very specifically, when they're going to deliver it. And that leaves very little room for experimentation and real collaboration. And the results. Often learning is very too late. We're just left with often very poor trade-off decisions that we have to make late in the project. That leads to cutting major features that were really valuable or often very delayed schedules. So stage gate gives us a good way of working as a framework, as kind of a governance, but it doesn't really give us an optimal way of working to really collaborate, to solve problems, and to really create the best out of teams. And I'm sure you're all aware of those limitations. And the teams that struggle most with these traditional systems was really software teams. And if you were in software development 15 years ago, you probably know what I'm talking about. You write detailed requirements for everything you develop, and you spend more time just documenting than you were writing code and testing. So software teams really absolutely need it in a better way. So I'm sure you're familiar with the famous story. 17 developers are gathered at a conference early in 2001, and they drafted the Agile manifesto, and the result were these four tenets. So individuals, interactions over process, working software over documentation, customer collaboration, responding to change versus having a plan. And these really work, and companies see the benefits, and they see a lot of advantages in speed and quality, and they get this through a lot of the Agile tactics that have been developed through Scrum and SAFe and other methods. They do time boxing, deliver in short cycles, a lot more built-in collaboration and meetings daily to resolve problems, and doing incremental value creation through constant prioritization of things called user stories, and being able to be flexible with scope and getting a solution out there in the market quickly and then learning. And this works very well for software. And that's because it was really designed for software. They have the ability to do a continuous flow of releases. There really is not a lot of cost to change, and they can really add features almost daily, and teams are fairly homogeneous. They often share skills. They can prioritize and pull off different tasks, as they need to do. And the good news is that Agile really shifts the discussion from governance that we have with traditional processes to a way of working. And that's the advantage. But the problem is, well, for hardware, it's just different. And hardware has everything different from basic business model to how we make decisions from the very beginning to hard constraints. We have to make severe trade-offs, often in time, cost, specifications, and our team is just looks different. We have cross-discipline where we have mechanical engineers, electrical firmware, and software. And often we have to deal with things like schedules, and management really cares about schedules as well as lead times and all kinds of other factors like tooling. So it's just different. And the teams really have to, from the very beginning, from concept to launch, really think about trade-offs. And we have to live with those trade-offs and ultimately get to a value proposition that comes down to the right features, the right specifications, getting into manufacturing, and it has to be a holistic solution that we can live with. The bottom line is that agile tactics applied directly to hardware really just don't work because they weren't designed for how hardware works. So how do we resolve this? Well, that's what we're going to focus on today. And just to kind of summarize the difference between hardware and software, and this is going to evolve because hardware solutions are getting more and more integrated with software. They're becoming systems that we have to think about. And we can manage software very well with agile tactics because of the nature of the incremental value and the decision of really what feature is next. For hardware, it's really all about the trade-offs. We're always managing that scope, schedule, resource trade-offs. And we know that Agile works really well when it's an incremental value, but it doesn't work so well for hardware. So we want one system, one approach that really can work across the spectrum because we want something that can work for hardware, software, and integrated systems. I'm not sure we could do better than how Steve Jobs describes this in an interview he did with PBS way back in the 1990s. So let's take a look at this and see how Steve describes both the problem and how companies should really think about approaching product development for physical products.
What's important to you in the development of a product?
You know, one of the things that really hurt Apple was after I left, John Sculley got a very serious disease. And that disease, I've seen other people get it too. It's the disease of thinking that a really great idea is 90% of the work. And that if you just tell all these other people, here's this great idea, then of course they can go off and make it happen. And the problem with that is that there's just a tremendous amount of craftsmanship in between a great idea and a great product. And as you evolve that great idea, it changes and grows. It never comes out like it starts because you learn a lot more as you get into the subtleties of it. And you also find there's tremendous trade-offs that you have to make. I mean, there are just certain things you can't make electrons do. There are certain things you can't make plastic do or glass do. And as you get into, or factories do, or robots do. And as you get into all these things, designing a product is keeping 5,000 things in your brain, these concepts, and fitting them all together in kind of continuing to push to fit them together in new and different ways to get what you want. And every day you discover something new that is a new problem or a new opportunity to fit these things together a little differently. And it's that process that is the magic. And so we had a lot of great ideas when we started, but what I've always felt that a team of people doing something they really believe in is like when I was a young kid, there was a widowed man that lived up the street. And he was in his 80s. I think he might have paid me to mow his lawn or something. And one day he said, "Come on into my garage, I want to show you something." And he pulled out this dusty old rock tumbler. And it was a motor and a coffee can and a little band between them. And he said, "Come on with me." We went out to the back and we got some rocks, some regular old ugly rocks. And we put them in the can with a little bit of liquid and a little bit of grit powder. And we closed the can up and he turned this motor on. He said, "Come back tomorrow." And his can was making a racket as the stones went around. And I came back the next day and we opened the can And we took out these amazingly beautiful polished rocks. The same common stones that had gone in through rubbing against each other like this, creating a little bit of friction, creating a little bit of noise, had come out these beautiful polished rocks. And that's always been, in my mind, my metaphor for a team working really hard on something they're passionate about, is that it's through the team, through that group of incredibly talented people, bumping up against each other, having arguments, having fights sometimes, making some noise, and working together, they polish each other. And they polish the ideas, and what comes out are these really beautiful stones. Yeah.
So we just love that metaphor that Steve uses with polishing stones, and we love how he captures the problem I was sharing with the traditional approaches really as a disease that a lot of people have, and we've seen that as well, assuming that you can create this perfect PRD and you're going to end up getting a perfect product at the end. And it's deeper than that. So as you can tell, Steve is a visionary. He had an agile mindset really before agile was much of a thing. So he refers to empowering passionate teams to really transform a great idea into a great product. It takes some healthy friction, it takes iterating and learning. And you need to make a lot of trade-offs. And he mentioned, 5,000 things that are constantly in your head. And the magic is having a process to do this. So we were really blown away that one of our customers called this video to our attention and really shared how the MAHD framework is helping their team achieve this. And Steve didn't really call it this, but he's really describing an Agile for hardware process that should work. And we couldn't do a much better job of describing MAHD and the approach than he did. So that's what we're looking forward to sharing with you. So the modified Agile for hardware development framework is an Agile-based market success framework, and it's designed to optimize the team's way of working while meeting the needs of physical solutions. So that's our complex definition, but really simply, as Steve might have said, it's a process to transform great ideas into great products. And one of the key things to note in this definition is that it really has to be a market success framework and process, because it can't just be development. It's so important to get the trade-offs and get marketing involved that every decision we make as a team is going to have impact on market success. So really, which makes it makes a requirement that it's a market success process, and that's one of the challenges teams have. So at the core of the MAHD framework really is Agile principles, and that really supports the way of working, and we want to build on that and look at the strengths of Agile on how do we empower teams, how do we focus on value, build collaboration into it, transparency, risk management, but we don't want to lose some of the things that we get from traditional approaches. We need that governance that can help teams make good decisions on the project, make sure there's schedule, make sure there's at least an element of planning to meet the needs of hardware. And also, we don't want to lose some of the integration and working with other processes and frameworks that teams have in place, and really has to align with other parts of the organization. So if you have software that's already adopted SAFe, design thinking can add a lot of value to hardware, all the lean processes, we don't want to lose that. So we need something that's going to integrate seamlessly with all those and really brings together a great way of working for teams, as well as a governance approach that works for physical solutions. We started this journey as early as 2016 before really trialing this work, and we introduced the MAHD framework in 2017. And since then, we have worked with a wide range of companies in different industries, really polishing it into a set of methods that's proven flexible approach for hardware development. And we really look forward to releasing MAHD 4.0 next quarter. It's going to really add some more tools and really think about guidance across the entire product lifecycle. So we released MAHD 2.0. That was really the complete MAHD framework that really works across the whole product lifecycle management from end to end. And that includes things like portfolio management. It really thinks about project selection and innovation management, sustaining engineering. And we want to think about how to apply Agile methods and thinking throughout the entire life cycle of a product. So when we released MAHD the first time, MAHD 1.0, it was really about the core MAHD framework and thinking about project excellence. And that's really where we're going to spend most of our time today. So some of the outcomes that teams typically see, immediately they see improved team satisfaction. They work together better, it's less contentious, and there's a lot of value just on the way of working. So ultimately, though, they're getting more speed and efficiency and focus on value. And we'll talk about risk management a little bit and how you get the advantage of a whole different risk profile. And at the end of the day, most teams see increased speed with higher customer value. Vishal is going to take us through an overview of the MAHD framework and really take a look at some of the elements and how this might actually work to get those benefits we just discussed. Vishal?
Thanks, Dorian. So core MAD focuses on what we call as the project level excellence. A MAD project can start with a small team. The moment the project is identified, you don't even need a full team initially. A cross-functional team would kick off the project typically in 1 to 3 weeks using the MAD on-ramp and then start executing through iterative cycles. MAD, the good thing is it's applicable to any size project. And it's based on Agile principles to reduce risk, align teams, make some fast decisions, and inspect and adapt along the way. Our USP is that the MAD tactics are purpose-built to support the unique challenges of hardware. The need for holistic schedules, integrated solutioning across multidisciplinary teams, constraints, very valid market constraints like product cost, certifications, third-party dependencies, lead times, and even shared resources. So let's dive into the specifics of how MAD addresses those challenges. So let's start by looking at the 3 key areas of modification that drive MAD results. The first one is going to be your MAD on-ramp. So as any hardware team will tell you, advanced planning is critical for success. But it also doesn't mean you got to figure everything out as you typically do in a stage gate approach. But instead, MAD focuses on helping teams identify the key areas to focus on as the team rapidly initiates the project with a directional iteration plan. So the second one is how to plan, execute, and learn iteratively, yet rapidly. And then finally, the third one is how do you set up and manage a cross-functional prioritized backlog? Now, in the interest of time, we won't spend a lot of time on the backlog tactics, since typically that's one of the easiest things for most teams to handle. All right, so for the fans of Super Mario, you'd consider the MAD on-ramp to be like the rocket boost that you can get at the start of a race. So while software teams are able to adopt Scrum quite easily, writing stories, managing backlogs, and starting to deliver code incrementally, hardware teams can't do that, right? They struggle. They're floundering due to the lack of a holistic view, difficulty incorporating architecture, and forget about delivering hardware iteratively. So they need a way to quickly get aligned so each functional area can move easily and quickly in the same direction without a ton of over-planning that is typically associated with stage gates and the traditional way of planning. So that's where the Agile Vision Brief and the MAD on-ramp come in. The Vision Brief aligns the whole organization on the intent of the project, from the target customer, the market positioning, to some of the hard constraints like cost and deadlines and things like that, and certifications. The MAD user stories clarify what the customer is wanting to achieve and why. So that sets the stage for the problem to solve. Product attributes outline the initial skeleton for a technical solution. It's not the entire design, it's just a lightweight skeleton. The focus matrix then enables the team to gain a common understanding of the biggest areas of risk and innovation. We refer to them fondly as the big rocks. This sets up the directional path to success through a preliminary prototype strategy and the IPAC iteration plan, which is, again, a straw man version of things. Initially, the team is focusing on the big rocks and not trying to plan out everything. So as a final step of the on-ramp, the team gets ready to start iterating by creating an execution backlog for the initial iteration. Again, to clarify, they're not going to plan everything with a Gantt chart. What they're focusing on are the big rocks and the immediate work they need to get started to work through those. For example, consider as a forklift operator, I want to quickly pick up my cargo. Now that would require a combination of steering, control interfaces, intelligent fork design, and so on to satisfy that particular user problem or user need. One developer or engineer couldn't possibly do all of this or complete it in a quick iteration or sprint. So the nature of hardware is such that satisfying a user need requires a range of attributes and disciplines to satisfy. Therefore, user stories in MAHD describe the customer need at a much higher level, which means there's going to be far fewer of them needed than in a typical software project. So again, going back to the on-ramp overall, this is a huge difference compared to traditional hardware development approaches. Working through the early stages of the front end typically will take months and is a contentious contract negotiation rather than a collaboration to solve a market problem. The MAD approach is instead about setting up the problem to solve, and then collaborating as a team to solve the problem, addressing the big rocks first. So in the same time, what we've seen is that while the traditional tree might work through the PRD, specification, negotiations, architectural documents, and building a Gantt chart, MAD teams are often running. They would have worked through the major areas of risk and innovation with some early prototypes. They would have solicited and gotten customer feedback and even started making some early trade-offs around the big areas of risk and innovation. So what the result is that there's early risk reduction and typically a far more predictable schedule with a better idea of what your resource needs are going to be, and honestly, a much better understanding of what is driving the customer value. The second big area is on how to execute the iterative development in hardware. In software, we know that iteration essentially means it's completed and releasable features, but you can't do that in hardware as we discussed. It needs to be discussed more holistically. Enter IPAC iterations. For each iteration, which is essentially the outer circle in the picture, the team will work through the IPAC acronym. Typically, they'll start with a question like for the P, which is the prototype. What is the right level of prototype for what we need to learn? Then they'll talk about the integration to say, what do we need to integrate across functions? A stands for alignment, which is, how and what do we need to align? Whether it's the functions outside the team, could be executives, could be external parties, suppliers, vendors, partners. And then the C, which is actually the feedback loop and quite critical, is going to be what are we able to validate at this time using customer feedback. The system level goal or iteration goal will drive the focus of each iteration. So let's focus on each iteration right now for a second. The team will incrementally build and validate the big rock or the big question they have, and then the solution that they've built via prototyping, and get the customer feedback to make optimal trade-off decisions throughout the project. We use longer iterations, which are the IPAC iterations, to identify the big learning and alignment milestones. And the shorter iterations are the 2-week sprints to allow each subsystem or discipline to work in smaller teams, manage their tasks while they're working towards the larger iteration goals, so that they can continue to work on progress towards their individual swim lane deliverables and satisfy the big picture. A key consideration is going to be around the prototyping. How do you iteratively align the solution using a prototype? By prototype, in MAD, we mean a demonstrable output for the purpose of learning. Now, this can be anything from a sketch to on a piece of paper, to a 3D printed model, or even a partially working solution. As the project evolves, the prototypes will typically gain more functionality and fidelity as the learning requirements become more targeted. Another related concept is the vertical slice. Typically, we will coach and remind the team to start with the question, what do we need to learn next? This is often one of the on-ramp outcomes, but continues to evolve and change as the project grows. A vertical slice is typically a portion of the system that comes together to learn something, to validate technology, get it in front of customers, and so on. So if you wanted to validate whether you have the right interface functions, as an example, you might have a vertical slice of partially working PCB, some early firmware and software, but no chassis. And then every discipline works through their portion during the sprints while collaborating across disciplines to hit that vertical slice milestone or goal. So again, to clarify, MAHD Agile is not a serial development of features like in software, but more about how do features combine and integrate to satisfy the user need while focusing on the biggest areas of risk and innovation. What might that look like, right? How do you start with a skeleton of a solution, no detailed requirements, and still deliver a product? So a MAD project will typically go like this. So after the on-ramp begins, the team starts looking at investigations tied to the big rocks. They then go into rapid divergence convergence cycles to start mitigating the areas of biggest risk and innovation. As the big rocks get answered, more becomes known, things start getting locked down, and then the team will get into smaller divergence convergence cycles until the solution is finalized. Later in the project, typically only the most critical areas may be left open as the team, and that's up to the team's discretion. This is a key concept of staying strategically flexible versus, Agile for software, where you're just flexible and you can continue to change the features. As the team works through the big unknowns, what's going to be left is going to be a lot more predictable. Overall, the big way to, or the 50,000 foot view to think about this is that the team will focus and address the big risk, high value items first using IPAC iterations. It demonstrates progress throughout, and it adjusts the plan frequently to reflect their learnings and trade-offs. The next area of modification that we want to talk about today is going to be the backlog itself. For software, the backlog is often just a long list of prioritized features and technical stories, in the format that a lot of people are aware. Product owner will typically take care of prioritizing them, managing them, setting the acceptance criteria. Now, as you can imagine, that's not going to work for hardware. It's going to be impossible for a single person or product owner to own the entire backlog across multiple disciplines. So in MAD, there's two levels of backlog. The system level epics will capture the top level IPAC iteration goals as they evolve through the IPAC iterations. These are then broken down by swim lanes for each of the subsystems or disciplines, and then prioritized within that swim lane, since it would be impossible to prioritize the mechanical task against electrical, firmware, software. So those are going to be various swim lanes that you might have. It could even be subsystems. In MAD, each swim lane is going to be owned by a technical or discipline leader. They will also then work with their team to lead the estimation of tasks, creation of tasks, and through sprint planning to ensure that their swim lane through sprinting is aligning with the larger IPAC iteration goals. All right, so now I think, hopefully that kind of all made sense. This is where the biggest value that we've seen of a modified approach versus the traditional approaches. It's going to be your risk profile. As I'm sure you've all experienced and seen, stage gate will start out okay, often with reasonable confidence that's built around the project plan and the Gantt chart. But as the project progresses, reality starts setting in. Assumptions start failing in different areas, leading to project delays, changing requirements, and having to make, the risk continues to accumulate essentially. And typically, it keeps getting pushed out until major trade-off decisions have to be made. With the MAD approach, risk is identified and tackled early. So essentially, we're building risk management into every IPAC iteration, highest risk, highest value being addressed first. And interestingly, the irony we've found is that the schedule predictability is actually higher with a MAD project than with a traditional approach, essentially as the variability goes down with every IPAC iteration. with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dorian to talk about some use cases and case studies that demonstrate how companies that have gone MAD have benefited from adopting this framework.
Thanks, Vishal. So I know we are covering a lot in a very little amount of time, so we're looking forward to your questions on everything we already shared with you. But it might help to share a couple of the case studies that we've worked with companies and how they're approaching MAD and some of the benefits they're getting. The first case study we want to share is with an industrial process control company, and we worked with this team. They were initiating a project with a very innovative new solution. They were trying to create intelligent process monitoring. And you can imagine that, that's a high value potential. And they had a great product manager working on it. They wrote a very detailed requirements document with over 400 requirements. And you might have seen something similar, and this is not unusual. And then they started having a wide range of meetings, monthly, weekly meetings to work through it with the R&D team. It was literally taking months to work through the requirements. And after a couple of months, they literally worked through the first 50 or so, and they really had no end in sight. And this is a common problem with requirements because the nature of them is that you're making these big assumptions that you know both the customer need and the optimal solution to satisfy it. And then it's up through working with R&D to really break them apart without doing any real experimentation or collaboration on it. And they're having to commit to this. And as soon as R&D says yes to a feature or yes to the PRD, then they're really creating a contract that they feel obligated they have to commit to with a specific product and a specific date. And that while that might give management comfort, it's not really reality. And so all the things that Vishal shared with you earlier come in with increasing risk, et cetera. So this process takes months. Sometimes we've seen it even take years, and there is a better approach. So one of the first things we do with the MAD framework is really break this into two parts. So, starting with the vision brief, getting that strategic intent with the team, working through those customer outcomes and the product attributes, they're able to break the requirements problem into really two foundational components. And with product attributes, they're thinking about what are the big things that are going to drive value, the outcomes we're looking for prioritization. And we bring that together through matrix thinking, and that's part of the focus matrix of the on-ramp. And in this case, the team was able to identify really two areas that they needed to focus on. One was the human-machine interface. One was thinking about what's the best communication protocol. And by using those rapid prototypes, sometimes on paper, sometimes digital, and getting rapid feedback, they were able to really accelerate their effort. So just the front end itself, they were able to reduce by 80%. And this alignment allowed them to really get started quickly in that right direction. And they maintain that alignment through IPAC iterations, working through the details each cycle, each iteration. And overall, they're able to get a 40% faster time to market with a very innovative solution. The second case I want to share with you is solution for a satellite communication encryption solution. They also had a similar challenge where they had very long front end and very unpredictable schedules, and they were often late to market. And one of the challenges with this team is that they always felt they had to have a very elegant and perfect solution. And you've always probably heard that, perfect is the enemy of good enough. And that's one of the key principles of Agile is, what is good enough in every situation? And sometimes good enough has to go very far, and sometimes good enough can be very basic. So depending on your strategy and your situation. But in this case, the team really wanted to go far in developing these perfect integrated solutions. And it was always creating some contention with management and product management on why can't we do this faster? And every project ended up being high risk. So working through the MAD framework, the team really clarified in the early stages with the vision brief and working through the on-ramp is what's really critical here? What are the constraints that we should be working to? And the date was one of the ones that they really decided this is a high priority. And that cost could actually be flexible and even the resource could be flexible. And they just had to ask if they needed resources to hit the date and really move faster. And it really started with a question in the on-ramp is how might we develop a prototype to trial with customers in 9 months? And this plays on one of the key concepts in the MAD framework of look forward and plan back. So the teams are always looking for that next major learning milestone and then planning back sometimes for more minor learning milestones to reach that. And sometimes it's a couple of iterations that they need to hit that. In this case, they wanted to get that prototype with trial customers, and it asked them to rethink the architecture. So they rethought the architecture to think about how to do this new protocol on a daughter board by using and leveraging some of the core functionality and bringing it together. So they're able to do that quickly with an early prototype. They did get into trial in 9 months, and it was so successful with customers that they actually were able to launch it much earlier and get a full product in 15 months. So it ended up being about 33% faster time to market. They were actually first to market with this protocol that allowed them to get higher margins. And then it gave them a path to a more integrated, lower cost and an optimized solution that the engineering team really wanted. But it was just a new approach they had to think about, and they're able to do that from early stages of the on-ramp and then through IPAC iteration planning. Okay, the last case study I want to share with you is really a different approach that, any good process is just a tool, and we can use it for whatever benefits we want to get. In this case, the company was fine with their development cycles, but they weren't happy with their margins. And as we often see in traditional processes, product management was asking for a lot of features, more than they knew the team could actually deliver, hoping that they could get at least some of them. And the problem was the focus was always more on getting the features R&D could actually develop more than what customers really found valuable. And often near the end of the project, it was always those P1, those high priority features that would get cut because they were the hardest, and that allowed them to hit the schedule. So the nature of waterfall is often making those bad trade-off decisions. So what the team did was using the on-ramp to align on customer outcomes. The team really developed a rapid prototyping and a customer feedback plan so they could prioritize and they could test their assumption using simple prototypes in the earliest IPAC iterations. And then they used each IPAC cycle to optimize customer value and identify where they can lower costs by focusing on the most important attributes. So one interesting element here is that the team had been trying SAFe. If you're familiar with Scaled Agile for Enterprise, they tried it for a year, but it really wasn't helping. And they were asked to create these fully autonomous feature teams, identify the range of features within a 3-month increment, write user stories. And it really didn't solve their problem, didn't give them the focus that they needed and the ability to make those difficult trade-off decisions. And the team had always felt kind of disjointed and not sure how this is going to come together. So by taking a more holistic view with the vertical slices and an associated prototype plan, it really gave them that whole product focus to optimize value and work through those IPAC cycles and get to a predictable schedule with value they were looking for. And the results in this case were they had much better marketing R&D collaboration. They were able to hit 50% higher margins as a combination of price stability, a lot lower less discounting, and then able to get their costs down, and then even more predictable outcomes so they could plan their launch. And they knew what they were going to be able to deliver when so they could have more effective product launches. So a lot of great benefits from this. There's a lot of things that those outcomes have in common. We'd love to share more details with you, but we just don't have a lot of time. But they all have in common that, you're taking a team that is able to have a focused problem, and then they can work together to really solve that. And then having a framework to provide the magic that Steve mentioned earlier to do that. And we'd like to end with another Steve Jobs story. So if you've ever owned an iPod MP3 player, you may know that this is the product that really saved Apple when Steve came back as CEO way back in January 2000. And this was launched in October 2001. And their vision was to get 1,000 songs in your pocket. And how did they get there? And they really used an Agile approach without calling it Agile. And they developed these foam mock-ups to carry around in their pockets, and they put lead weights to see how the weight affected comfort and usability. And then later they would actually submerge it in water with later prototypes to see, is there room inside for more electronics? Can we make it more compact? And so they use that rapid prototyping, and we can compare their approach to how another competitor in the market, and I was very close to this market because I was in audio technology at the time, and I watched these evolve, and I watched Rio, who was the leader at the time, and they were developing this product using kind of traditional methods, and they would try to do it in kind of time boxing, but they really didn't have that same agile mentality that Apple did. And the result was really that Apple took 70% of this market within a year, and Rio was really gone in 3 years. So we know Agile works if you're able to apply it correctly. So that's really what we had for you today. We hope you learned a lot. We hope that we were able to explain things enough to get you going. But if you want to learn more and you want to go deeper, the first thing to do is go to the MAHD Framework website. You can download resources. Probably a good place to start is the MAHD ebook. And if you're ready to go, if you've got a pilot that you want to work on, give us a contact and we give you some advice. One program that we have is called the MAD Accelerator or MAD Team Accelerator, and it's perfect for teams that really have a pilot ready to go. And you can literally get up and running in a matter of weeks. We do a deep dive on the training, get your leaders up to speed on it, and really get the team ready to execute. And that's our favorite program. But we also can offer a wide range of workshops depending on where you are on your journey. So please contact myself or Vishal, and we really want to hear from you on where you are, even if it's just to get some advice on how to approach leveraging and applying Agile in your environment. So with that, I'm going to stop here and we're going to open it to questions. We've covered, I know, a lot that you probably may not be clear on. And if you don't have a question today, feel free to contact us. But let's dive in and see some of the questions that we have seen in chat.
All right, the first one I see is how would the MAD framework align with Gates? It seems that the flexibility you describe would make this difficult. So let's kind of step back for a second and what is the purpose of Gates in a stage gate process, right? Let's kind of rethink that. Let's make sure we understand who is it for, why. So one of the Agile principles or ideas is individual interactions or processes and tools. The stage gate is a tool. It has a purpose and for certain people. And so the idea is to kind of suss that out and understand how can we kind of do that in the most optimal way. So now going back to MAD, if you recall, the team makes progress via IPAC iterations. So it's incremental progress, demonstrable progress. So one of the first things you could do is look at your typical stage gate process and look at how you can align some of the IPAC iteration milestones with those. So rather than tying, so now you're kind of working with the process rather than against it. On top of that, what you can also do is think about the documents that are really necessary for those different stages or stage gates, and then work backwards to say, hey, if these are really important, the MAD team can and should absolutely work on them along the way. So you're always ready for a stage gate. You're always thinking about the stage gate rather than trying to fit it in for the sake of fitting it in. The best part is, we would highly recommend this, is use the demonstrable outcomes during the stage gate to demonstrate the progress that the team has made, the real progress that they've made, the big risks that they've addressed, the trade-off decisions they had to make along the way, and why the product is where it is today, and then what's coming next. So that would be one of the best ways to utilize the stage gate to actually make it valuable to management and stakeholders, and make it provide the right visibility instead of just Gantt charts and 30% done kind of thing. Dorian, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, 30-30. That, it's one thing that we've experienced often is that when you look at your gate process, it's often kind of a third, a third, a third. A third of the things that you need for a gate review, you're doing naturally as part of the MAHD framework. A third, you're going to discover they really weren't necessary at all. And a third, you might have to kind of prepare a little bit of modification just to hit those gate milestones, but it's really not too bad. And it's very different than often teams treat their gate reviews as a huge product, and they're doing meetings, they're doing reviews of reviews, and it's almost distracts the team for literally weeks at a time just to hit a gate. And that should be the opposite. Our process should work for us. We're not working for the process.
Okay. So the next question is, how long would it take a team to learn the MAHD framework if you're in the middle of a project? How disruptive or risky would it be?
Why don't I start that and then you can weigh in, Vishal? That I think it's a really good question because it's often hard to pave the road you're driving on. And so from our experience in the middle of a project isn't the most ideal situation, but it's very manageable. Now, ideally, you're starting at the beginning of a project from the very first stages of concept, because that's where you're going to get a lot of the benefits of Agile and the MAD framework. but you can absolutely start in the middle of a project because there's no better time to get started than today. And when we start in the middle of a project, we're going to ask you generally to take what you've learned, all the artifacts that you have, those PRDs, and we're going to massage those and work very quickly through the on-ramp to get the benefits of Agile, the preparation to get the project started in the right direction, but not lose all of the learning and the work that you've done in the project. So we're going to try to converge and merge those two very quickly to get you in an Agile way of working without losing any steps or losing your heartbeat as a project to move forward.
Yep. And I think honestly, this question reminds me of a recent customer engagement where they had started in the middle. They actually had Gantt charts. They were halfway through the project. They thought everything was in the bag. They just had to continue working through their plan. Interestingly, once we kind of quickly coached them on the on-ramp and we kind of started working through the on-ramp, a few hours later, they already had come up with like 6 or 7 things or risks or big opportunities of innovation that they could still bring it into the project to improve the outcome, to reduce the cost, because it was actually a cost-saving project. So it was interesting that how the whole idea behind on-ramp and brainstorming can get the juices flowing. And even on a project that seemed in the bag, they were able to find new things.
Yeah, I find it interesting as well on a lot of projects we worked on is that teams get consumed by the details. They kind of forget to take a step back and look at the big picture. And they have to do that very consistently and as a team. And that's often kind of lacking in traditional approaches. So it's good to see that that team can take a step back and really focus on what's important. So let me have one for you here. Great question from Ted in California. If requirements can change throughout the project, as a lot of people expect or think about Agile, how do you manage this? Isn't everything always in flux?
Well, good question, especially if you're coming from a traditional way of working through this. One of the challenges with the requirements is that the connotation that it means that you understand the problem and potentially the solution or the specification that will solve that problem. The reality is it's an assumption. So what we instead want to do with MAHD is we break the assumption to say we understand everything. Instead, we say, hey, we understand the target strategically, where we want to go, why, but then work with using the feedback loops and the customer outcomes, as we call them. So let's look at the problem. Let's figure out smartly as a team, how do we kind of come up with or evolve a solution that can satisfy this need in the best way possible. So it's always about optimization and finding the right trade-offs so that you're hitting the highest value that the customer really cares about. Anything?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting element to this question that is about documentation. That nice thing about a PRD document is that you've got everything documented in one place, and if things change and you're going to define the solution, as we talk about, through evolution of the Agile process, how do you even document that? It does require teams to think about things like digital documentation differently, how you're going to capture the decisions of the team, and how you're capturing the definition of the solution. Because we still need, at the end of the day, to have a frozen design with specifications that are documented for manufacturing. So all that has to happen. And the team's going to work through that systematically. They do that through the IPAC iteration planning. They're evolving it. And at the end of the day, we're still going to have all that required documentation. This is not going to be in the exact same form as a traditional framework.
Actually, I got one for you. As an ex-product manager, I think this one's going to be close to your heart. So the question is, we often don't have direct access to customers. So how are we going to get the feedback cycles and loops?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's one of those maturity as an organization, maturity as a team. We absolutely see value in those customer feedback loops. And we don't want teams to really get, too concerned that they don't have that yet as they get started with Agile, because that's going to be something that's going to evolve. And there are techniques to do that. And, we help teams set up customer panels. And it really comes down to, you don't need a large numbers. A lot of people think, oh, we need statistically valid number of customers that we're going out to. They got to be the perfect customers to get feedback. And that's not the case at all. In a lot of cases today, people have zero customer feedback. So even getting a very small number of feedback loops going with a small number of customers can have huge advantages, good, fast decisions, optimizing their solutions. And it might sound difficult, especially if you're an embedded product that is, a couple steps away from a final solution. You still have customers. You got the people that are integrating your solution. You got the customers of them. And so part of the key is as you mature is to identify what are the right types of customers. And when we use the word customer, it can sometimes be the installer, it can be a distributor, it can be the purchaser. So it can be anybody that's going to give you that valid feedback for optimal success. But it is something that the team often has to, build a muscle to do, and that takes a little bit of time and energy sometimes.
And then, I would add that potentially, right, you might have some internal customers or stakeholders. You might also have some external ones. It's always going to be a combination. It kind of reminds me of the adage, when you first start, right, something is better than nothing. So you
Yep.
might not have a good enough, a customer feedback loop, but, you want to get there, but start somewhere.
Yeah. And it's all about learning. Agile is about learning, and even as you build the process, you're going to be learning and evolving. So, Vishal, I got one for you. A lot of companies have to deal with things like industry certification. So this person said, how can MAHD Framework handle things like medical compliance or other certifications?
All right. Very valid question, very relevant to the hardware industry. The simplest thing, the way to answer that is going to be, in MAHD, when you build what we call as our iteration plan, which is essentially the way to manage the project at a high level, it's kind of milestone driven. We say, look forward and plan back. So if you have a certain industry certification, validation, certain steps that must be done before the product can go into production or can be released to the market, you just bake that into the plan. And sometimes, certifications take relatively long amount of time. So what you're looking to do is potentially optimize. Is there a way you can optimize so that you can do some stuff in parallel? Right? Can you optimize your certification so maybe some parts of production can still continue or things like that? So you're going to look for, we're going to ask, or we request or recommend the teams to look at those opportunities to say, okay, we got to do this. Let's kind of look forward, plan back, but then also look to optimize as part of the plan.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Agile and MAHD Framework is it just asks teams to think differently. And the example I shared with the satellite encryption is that, rethink the architecture, rethink your approach to compliance, rethink, what's taking long. And that's kind of building in that lean thinking a little bit with the 80-20 rule is what's the areas that's creating the most delay in this project or creating the most risk, and just focusing on that and getting it down, and then you focus on that next thing. And it can't be in serial because then things aren't coming together often fast enough. But it gives us an approach on how to think about it, and compliance is just one of those areas as well.
Wonderful.
I got a question for you, Vishal,
Okay.
that came in is interesting. Is that, hey, looking at the MAHD team, it doesn't look like you're a big team, and we're a huge organization. Do you guys have the resources to really help somebody of our size?
Absolutely. First of all, the best part is that the MAHD framework itself can support any size organization. It can also support organizations that may have some groups that do, stage gate or want to continue to do stage gate, or some that might want to have some software might be safe. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part, so the framework itself is supportive. As far as our team, we've been around the block between Dorian and I, but we also have additional consultants, and we also have partners that we work with to kind of scale to the engagement. One important aspect, though, that I do want to call out, no matter the size of the customer, at the end of the day, at some point, our consulting engagement will kind of go away. It is one of the big things that we do is from day one, we look to groom and build a train the trainer model, use that model to groom an internal evangelist, maestro, or multiple maestro, and even create a center of excellence. So depending on the scope of your engagement, especially if you kind of buy into the idea of MAHD as an organization and incorporate more of it, we actually can help you set it up throughout the organization with the center of excellence that can continue to take the baton, so to speak, so that MAD thrives within, and Agile thrives within your organization.
Great. Yeah, I'd just like to add that, part of the work that we've done, as you saw the evolution of MAD, is really build out the training materials and the tools and the resources so that teams really have what they need to be successful. Everything from the MAD posters to estimation cards, key concepts, train the trainer documents. So we've really tried to create a holistic program that you can learn as a team, as a company quickly, embrace it, or really internalize it and implement as fast as possible, and then leverage that as you expand. So we've seen no problem really expanding or helping companies of any size. So it was a great question.
All right, so I think that's a wrap. We thank you all for joining and participating. It's been a great session. Once again, we'd highly recommend, if MAD has piqued your interest, kind of, if you want to understand more, go to mahdframework.com, MAHD. And we love people and customers going MAD. We've met MAD a long time ago. We enjoy the framework, and we continue to evolve it. We look forward to working with more of y'all.
Yep, thank you all as well. And one final question I saw come in is, where did the term MAD come from? Because I don't know if they like it or don't like it, but that was something that we spent some time trying to think out. What is the best way to describe this? We often even hesitate to use the word agile because agile become so associated with the dogma of agile for software that folks immediately kind of say, oh, it doesn't work for hardware. But if you think about the principles, they work really well. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we brought agile into it. And it is modified, and it's for hardware development. So it just naturally came out as MAD. Sometimes folks do want to pronounce it differently, but that's how we pronounce it, and we appreciate that you've even looked at it and found it intriguing as well. So thank you all for your time. We look forward to hearing from you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, thank you all.